Thank you so much for that warm welcome. I really appreciate it. What I just performed is a very small aspect of BMX freestyle biking. I've been riding for about 16 years, and throughout the course of my career, I've learned one valuable lesson. I'll get into that later. But for now, I want to give you a brief overview of BMX, the sport that I just did. We're starting off with some history. This is BMX racing back in the 1970s. This is where freestyle derived from when Bob Harlow started doing some basic tricks on his BMX bike. Throughout the 1980s, those basic tricks really started to evolve, especially when riders added standing pegs to their bikes. This opened up a whole new realm of possibilities for different tricks. It was around this time in the 1980s that ramp riding also took off, where riders would perform various aerial tricks out of quarter pipe and half pipe ramps. And by the 1990s, street riding became the latest craze, where riders would use various objects or structures within the urban environment to do tricks on, almost as though these structures or objects were impromptu trick apparatuses. It was around this time that grinding took off as well. It existed when riders used the pegs as devices to slide across rails and ledges. Grinding became a staple of modern-day street riding, as you see it right here. Except over the years, the grinds have really progressed and advanced. That's a typical trend we see throughout BMX. The riding and the tricks always advance as riders try to continually outdo things that have been done before them. But the overall concept of street remains the same, where riders use the urban environment like a big impromptu skate park. This is actual skate park riding, or as we call it, park riding, which derived from the ramp riding of the 1980s. Except in parks now, they use box jumps as well as quarter pipe ramps to do their aerial tricks, where they fling their bikes and bodies through the midair. Or they do more technically based tricks on the decks of ramps called lip tricks. Park riding also incorporates some elements of street riding with ledges and modified handrails for the riders to do grinds on. But overall, the goal of a rider is to create a route or a run throughout the course that highlights or demonstrates their specific trick abilities. And then there is dirt jumping or trails riding, where there aren't any sort of ledges. It's just a series of dirt mounds that the rider launches off of, trying to get as much height as possible and trying to do tricks with as much style as possible. And then there is Bmx Flatland Ii. This is the discipline that I performed earlier. This is the furthest removed discipline from the others in BMX, as there are no apparatuses or structures for the riders to do tricks on. They simply perform on a flat, two-dimensional surface. The tricks typically take place on the front wheel or the back wheel. The tricks link into and out of each other to form different combinations. Flatland is actually considered the most difficult discipline in BMX freestyle, as the balance required to do a lot of these tricks is very, very demanding. And it takes mastery of each trick in order to put them into different combinations. The one rule in Flatland is that the rider is prohibited from touching the ground. So that is a pretty small overview of the entire sport. You get a good glimpse into the different disciplines. Over the years and decades, each of these four main disciplines have branched off and evolved into somewhat of their own individual sports. This has happened because, as I mentioned earlier, riders are always trying to progress and advance and do things that have never been done before. So with that, the level of riding has really advanced to a point where if anybody wants to get involved with BMX freestyle, they have to focus on one specific discipline in order to become professional, in order to master it. Even to become halfway decent and halfway good at any one discipline, the rider has to really focus all their practicing on that one specific discipline. Of course, there are exceptions. I'm one of the exceptions. I never became a professional or mastered any one discipline in particular. I was a gymnast throughout my childhood. I did gymnastics up until I was about 13 years old, but I thought BMX was the coolest thing ever, and I always wanted to do it. So it was around the time I was about 12 or 13, I started trying to do some dirt jumps. Unfortunately, it wasn't very successful for me. I wiped out a lot. I could barely maintain stability in midair. I crashed a lot. It seemed like I lacked the natural ability, to do jumping. So after a while, I was actually discouraged, and I kind of gave up. By the time I was 15 years old, I started to practice some flatland tricks in the comfort and privacy of my parents' driveway. I caught on to the few tricks I was able to learn, and from there, I was completely addicted. I was obsessed. All I thought about was riding. I really looked up to the top professional riders in the sport. I idolized these guys and girls. They were able to do things that were incredibly impressive on their bike. They were notorious for doing bike tricks, so I dreamed of one day hopefully also being notorious for doing bike tricks as well. So I followed their example and tried to hack it as a competitive flatlander. I started off trying to practice tricks in order to get them consistent so I could go to contests, do well, and progress throughout the competitive ranks of flatland with all hopes of eventually qualifying in the professional class and becoming a professional flatlander. Unfortunately, that never happened. I was competing when I was an amateur, and I realized that a lot of my amateur peers were a lot more advanced than I was. They were doing tricks that were a lot more difficult than anything I could do. It seemed like they were more easily able to learn these tricks than I was able to. They were progressing a lot faster than I could. So after not doing very well in the contest, it became apparent that my dreams as a professional flatlander weren't very realistic, and that a lot of my peers would eventually procure those top spots in competitive flatland. So I kind of gave up on that one too after a while. But at this point, I was completely enthralled by BMX. It's all I wanted to do, and I wanted to continue in some way, shape, or form. I wanted to become notorious still for doing bike tricks. So at some point, I started to redirect my focus away from the athletic pursuit of BMX freestyle, and I focused more on the artistic endeavor. Because at its essence, BMX freestyle is an artistic sport, much like gymnastics, figure skating, diving. We're just doing aesthetically pleasing movements with our bikes and bodies. That's all it comes down to. And for the sake of artistry, I wanted to stand out. I wanted to create a style that was unlike anything anybody was doing, because all great artists stood out in their own way, in their own way, shape, and form. So in realizing that each of the disciplines were very segregated, I decided I would stand out pretty easily if I just took some flatland and if I combined that with some street riding, taking those flatland tricks and interacting with different objects in the environment while doing tricks. It would create different patterns of movement. It's not to say this has never been done before. There are a few riders that were before my time that took some flatland, they combined it with some street riding, but the extent to which they did this was very minimal. I realized this is a wide open, seemingly unexplored frontier, so that's the direction I took my riding. I also started to combine my gymnastics background into my riding to infuse more of an acrobatic style that most riders wouldn't have, because most riders didn't have the gymnastics background that I had. So I'm going to refer to some video clips that showcase my riding over the past several years, so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. This is where I perform a backward somersault over some wooden pallets. I like to use the mundane, ubiquitous objects in the urban environment that aren't the typical apparatuses like stair sets or rails that a typical street rider would use. I like to swing around poles or do a backward somersault over the hood of my car. In this next clip, I do a limbo underneath some semi-trailers. It's a trick I invented a few years ago. And this is a trick I did not invent. This is called a handlebar ride. It's a pretty standard trick in flatland. But I've taken the handlebar ride in my own direction by making different variations with that environmental interaction. Grabbing onto a basketball hoop, flipping off my bike, and flipping off the hoop, landing back on the bike end, or using a chin-up bar in Berlin when I was out there filming for my Red Bull video. In this next clip, I take advantage of being 1 meter off the ground by hucking a front flip dismount, or grabbing a skateboard, taking a cue from David Vanderspeck, and doing an acid drop onto the board. This next clip is a trick I performed earlier called the Trolley. It's a basic flatland trick, but I put my own twist on it by doing a spin by grabbing a bridge. This is the Skura tuck that I did earlier. It was invented by Brian Skura back in the 1980s. But of course, I've taken that trick in my own direction by making a dive, or by doing a scorpion kick off of a fence, landing back to the pedals, or by doing a half twist out of the tuck in order to land onto a trampoline or onto a skateboard, just for the sake of fun and creativity. This next trick is a combo that was invented by Chad DeGroat back in the 1990s. It's called the dark slide, tumbling the bike from one side to the other. I've taken that concept in my own direction by flipping the bike upside down and doing a grind, an upside down grind. From there, I do a little more of an elaborate dark side combo, and I also flip the bike into somewhat of a gymnastic apparatus right here, do a handstand from one side to the other. Total in gymnastic infusion, never been done before. This is just more of an elaborate dark side grind down a bigger handrail. And this next clip is a trick called a slide winder. It's very inspired by skateboarding as I push off the ground, but with the trick I was able to actually release the bike underneath objects or around objects and land back on the bike again, much like a skateboarder would when they do pop tricks and land back on the board again. But of course, I like to incorporate that gymnastics background into my movement. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I've taken some of these particular video clips as well as video clips that are similar. I've made small trick compilation videos, and I've uploaded these videos to the internet. To my surprise, over the past several years, these videos have actually gained a lot more viewership and a lot more popularity than most other BMX videos put out on the internet. Even the videos put out there by some of the top dominating pros in the sport across all disciplines, my videos have outviewed theirs. So I've been very, very fortunate. Actually, one of my videos went so viral that if you take all the views across all the different social media platforms it's been uploaded to, you combine all the views together, it collectively has more than any other in BMX history. So it's arguable, but I'm very concerned. I'm sorry. I'm very, very convinced that this is the case. Regardless, I've had a lot of success, and I've had the notoriety that I've dreamed of as a kid. And the cool thing is I'm not the best. I'm not the most talented. I can never hack it as a professional flatlander. I could barely even hack it as an amateur flatlander. I'm not a street rider, none of that stuff. I was only successful when I started riding my own way, just taking basic tricks and just reworking them into different patterns of movement. I've had some good monetary success with this. I've had different TV shows as well as ad agencies throughout the world reach out to me to use my clips in their TV shows or ad campaigns, things of that sort. I've made a pretty good amount of money doing that, surprisingly. I've also been flown around the world to make different live appearances and performances on different TV shows. I've had a handful of companies reach out to me and hire me to perform in videos they produce that promote their products. So I've been really, really lucky to carve out this professional career because, again, hey, I'm not the best guy. I'm not the most talented. And not only do I ride differently, but correspondingly, I earn my money differently because most pros in the sport, they go to contests, they do well, they get earnings, or they get royalty checks from their sponsors. I'm not officially sponsored by any one company. I get some support, of course, but nobody's paying me. And I'm not good enough in any one of the conventional disciplines to go to a contest and dominate it to get money. Just no way. I don't even have a chance. I could barely even hack it in an amateur contest, in all honesty. But I've been super fortunate just by doing things my own way. And this is the biggest lesson that I've drawn from BMX, is that you really don't have to be the most talented at what you do. You don't have to be like the elite or the best to be successful at it. A small percentage of people actually are the best at what they do, or the most talented. But for the rest of us, the majority of us who are mediocre, there's still hope for us to succeed, as I found. All we have to do is draw from our previous experiences that are unique to us. If we draw from these experiences and infuse them with what we are doing, we can redefine what it is that we do and stand out in a spectacular manner. That's my idea worth sharing. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.